Welcome to the Upshot, Multi-World Disc Golf's podcast about the latest in the disc golf world. I'm the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Josh Mansfield on this Tuesday, June 27th. The Des Moines Challenge just took place this past weekend, another Elite Series event on the Disc Golf Pro Tour. We've got the Preserve coming up this weekend in this flurry of tournaments, back-to-back-to-back Elite Series on 3 consecutive weekends. Josh, DMC champions over 3 rounds, Kristen Tatar. Over 2 rounds due to weather delays during round 2 is Gannon Buhr in the MPO side. And so a couple of repeat champions, more dominance from Kristen, back on top after missing cash last week for Gannon. Pretty impressive stuff from 2 of the most exciting players on tour right now.
It really did feel like another weekend that they were able to kind of showcase why they are... Well, Kristen is the solo leader and favorite of the FPO division week in and week out, and why Gannon can go... And, you know, we talked a little bit about this on the Rapid Reacts. Make sure to check that out. Gannon bounces back from not cashing last weekend at DDO, and then comes back and then is able to win this weekend. One other thing, if you haven't seen yet, Gannon's got a pretty great video of highlights from Silas Schultz, who promised to make him a video if Gannon won this weekend. So a little extra motivation for Gannon there from his Prodigy teammate who won last weekend.
Yeah, so we're not going to talk that much about DMC today because we have kind of a busy show. There's been a bunch of news percolating over the last 48 hours. Including, what do you know, more legal things in the disc golf universe. So we're going to get to those with Chris Clark of Disc Golf Law. We've never had on the show, but I talk to regularly. And so looking forward to having him on to give us some legal analysis of all things, including a new lawsuit against Paul McBeth and Dylan Cease at their course down in Florida. And we're going to have to investigate whether this claim, which is from somebody who claims they were hit in the head by a disc and are suing because of it. We're going to have to just explore whether that's legit or not, and what might come of that lawsuit. On the DMC front, you know, it seems like once again, and maybe this is a good time, we could take a look at the purse watch. You know, once again, this tournament is coming up huge. I mean, this is not an Elite Plus. This is a three round, in the case of this year, a 2-round for MPO tournament. And they come through with a monster $109,000 payout. Over $70,000 paid out to MPO, $38,800 to FPO, $60K in added cash. This is the second highest Elite Series event of the year, behind the Elite Plus Portland Open, and only behind it by about under $6,000. And Josh, the most interesting thing perhaps is that the MPO and FPO winners both got $12,250 for their win, matched payouts, as we heard Ty talk about last week in the interview. Thoughts on just the overall purse and the match payouts for the top?
Incredible. That this is how you establish and grow your tournament as being a critical piece of the Disc Golf Pro Tour, and going from not being on the tour to a replacement event during COVID to now being a pivotal stop because of the cash and the payout that is next to a big metropolitan area. This is how it's done. This is, and I think Ty Tanat deserves a lot of credit for the work that he has put in and the kind of tournament that he has turned this into, because it adds drama, it adds intrigue when you know that much money is on the line. And it's this sets Statmando says that this is the highest standard event FPO payout that we've seen. That wasn't at, and I think wasn't at a major. But I no, this is standard event.
Yeah, I think anything besides the Tour Championship.
Yes, it was the Tour Championship is what they excluded.
Because Worlds last year, the
11,000
payout was $11K, and that's the highest that we'd seen for a major. And so this surpasses that, which is pretty amazing. And you know, we got what do you know, Drew Gibson, you know, just doing his thing again on Twitter.com, I'm so tired of this guy and this stuff. Like insinuating that, FPO is getting paid out too much because they have a smaller field than MPO. And, look, if the sponsor comes in and they say, we want to allocate an extra X $1,000 in order to match the payouts for the top of the tournament, which, by the way, is what happens in tennis at majors. Why in the world would that be a problem? I really do not want to hear MPO players complaining about not having enough money in the payout, not having enough money in general, when they get more sponsorship dollars, more money week in and week out, more money at the top, more money in the middle. I don't want to hear it. And I understand the arguments about it's a deeper field, there's more players, you have total more purse. I'm fine with all that. I agree. It has to be balanced between the fact that you have more players in MPO, and you could even make an argument about there are more people interested in following MPO, so they should get more prize money too. But if a sponsor comes in and says they want to match the payouts, let them match the payouts.
Here's the other problem with this nonsense from Drew Gibson. Number one, if you get rid of those extra sponsorship dollars for the FPO payout, then FPO is literally less than half what the MPO payout is. The only reason it eclipsed that number is because of the additional monies that were given by the sponsor that they said wanted to go to the FPO field.
It's a normal payout, and then they added money to the top because the sponsor wanted to do it.
I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but the sponsor was the True Bank sponsor, their title sponsor, who put in $30K plus, and they were like, we'll go another $5 if you'll put it towards the FPO payout.
We should all be celebrating that.
Right. Like Drew gets more money.
Very cool.
Drew gets more money because of this sponsor, and he's over here like, no, they shouldn't be doing this. The other thing, it didn't change the distribution of the FPO payout, right? It's not like everybody got moved to this 12,250 mark. It was that one winner got bumped up, and then everyone else was at the same pay standard that it is based on the depth of the field. It's ridiculous. And this is the guy who complains that tournaments don't pay enough. You know what the problem is? You know why Drew's mad? It's because he didn't cash this weekend. Like, mad because bad, Drew. Like, you can't go out, not cash, and then complain that FPO got some money because you didn't get anything. Absolutely ridiculous.
So anyway, if you want to hear a lot more on DMC, we did a full Rapid React show about the tournament, talked about players up and down the top 10. We got an interesting email. I just want to, we're not going to do a mailbag segment in full today, but I wanted to mention this because I've seen this sentiment starting to percolate a little bit more. And so Zach emails in about the fact that the idea of a podium is at this point outdated in disc golf because, for one, they don't often these days actually have a physical podium where players stand, gold, silver, bronze. That exists. That has been a thing in disc golf. That's where the term came from, but you don't see it all that often these days. And so Zach's point is basically, he says, I'll just quote, "Given the huge jump in the level of competition and parity in the sport over the last few years, I think we need to broaden the discussion around results at the highest level to acknowledge the players that are getting top 10s and potentially even top 20s for majors." And so his point is like, why do we have to focus so much on the top 3, including in commentary, which, you heard it on DGN this weekend. If I'm in the booth, I'm often discussing the podium because it's an easy thing to kind of focus on, especially when the winner is not in doubt. And so, Zach says, look at this week in particular. Chris Clemens and Brody Smith both finished tied for 10th, averaging 1040 rated golf. 2 fan favorites and great stories coming out of DMC, given both of their relatively poor records this year. I didn't hear either of these guys mentioned on live coverage once. I know both of these dudes have to feel good about their performance. The same could be said about Valerie Mondahano, Maria Oliva, and Vanessa Van Dyken on the FPO side, all of which finished off the podium but in the top 10 and played above their rating and recent performance to have noteworthy finishes. So, Josh, what do you think about that?
It's funny. I actually just went and tried to find because I couldn't remember exactly what the point breakdown was for DGPT elite events. It looks like there's been a tie for either second or third place at every event this year, every Elite Series event. And so he talks about this weekend there was a big podium, but so far there is yet to be a podium where there wasn't some sort of a tie on the back end. And so I found that funny. But
I'll give you the points. You want the points?
Okay, yeah. Give me. There it is. Okay,
it's 100 for first, 85 for second, 75 for third, and then 69, 64, 60, 57, 54, 52, and 50. Down to 10th.
So the thing that I wanted to check and was looking for is, does the Pro Tour's point structure reinforce what Zach is talking about here? Because and to be honest, it kind of does. Like, there's first and second, and they get Bagonzo points, and then the difference between third and fourth is only 6.
Yep. And
then fourth and fifth is 5, and then 4, then 3, so on and so forth until it gets down to 2s, where they hold that for a while. So honestly, the way the Disc Golf Pro Tour points kind of incentivize is first or second. That's what you need to get. Otherwise, you're missing out on a lot of points. And so I see his point here about why the focus is. I think though there's a couple of things here. Number one, it's an easy to digest format, right? And he kind of mentions this when he talks about our picks, is if we were picking 5 or 10 deep,
no one would listen to the podcast. People already skip the picks. I know this. You know who you are.
and to guess like top 10 is just, at that point it's literally like, picking winners feels a little bit like throwing darts at a wall, but top 10 feels like taking a handful of darts and throwing it at a wall. So that's kind of, I think, part of the problem there. You should acknowledge top 10, but there are, and here's the other problem, for some players, top 10 isn't that strong of a performance. And we're not to the point where in golf, a top 10 for anybody is a good weekend.
Yes.
Because even the world's number 1 is going to finish outside the top 10 on a semi-regular basis, right? Maybe they don't finish outside top 15, top 20, but that's going to happen. On disc golf, though, when someone like Calvin is going to finish outside the top 10, that is notable because he hasn't finished worse than 6th yet at a Pro Tour, at an Elite Series event. And so I don't think we're quite at the level where we need to say, oh yeah, 10 deep is such a big accomplishment for everybody that we need to we've outgrown the podium. And so I understand where he's coming from. I think we might get there. But as of right now, yes, it is impressive that Chris Clemens and Brody Smith took top 10. And we mentioned that on Rapid Reacts. We pointed out Brody Smith and his finish. But I think right now, podium is still a good, concise way to talk about kind of the overall performance. Yes, it includes more players than just 3 sometimes. But until top 10 becomes prestigious enough that even the top player in the world finishing inside the top 10 is notable, but we shouldn't be changing the way we talk about tournaments.
It's a tricky thing, like when I'm looking at player of the year stuff at the end of the year and I'm thinking about, who am I voting for player of the year? I'm looking at wins. I'm looking at major wins. I'm looking at top 3s and top 10s. Typically, those are the things that I'm looking at, particularly, with extra emphasis on major performances. Because I do think top 10 is a metric that is valid, as well as just average tournament finish at Elite Series, average tournament finish at majors. These are all things you can use. You do have to broaden the scope. I think in the context of discussing it on a broadcast and things like that, part of that is because typically, especially as you get to the later rounds, the focus of the broadcast is very much on the players who are on the lead card, which probably means they're going to finish in the top 5. And then maybe the second card and sometimes the third card if those players are in the conversation for trying to make a push towards top 3, basically.
Yep.
So the whole focus of the coverage is on that. We're not necessarily seeing shot from this guy, shot from that guy, shot from this other guy in the same way you would in golf, where, you might see a great shot from somebody who's 6 cards deep. Occasionally we get that in the DGN world when they have a camera set up, for instance, on a particular hole that's just shooting that hole the whole weekend. And that's an opportunity for the commentators then to say, oh, what a great shot from Brody Smith on 16. He's looking like he's going to be in line for a top 10 finish, one of his best of the season, right? Like that is good context. But I think the nature of the focus on the top three makes sense for both historical reasons and because of kind of where the field is and where the depth is. So interesting thought there, and a great email from Zach. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk with Chris Clark of Disc Golf Law, and we will discuss not only what's going on in the Natalie Ryan case, perhaps a little bit of wrap up on the Gannon Buhr situation with Prodigy, but we're going to talk about this new lawsuit that basically just became known about, in the last couple days with McBeth and Dylan Cease and this course in Florida. So do not go anywhere. We will be right back on the Upshot.
At Pound, the quality of our gear runs deeper than the stitching. That's why we make everything right here in the U.S., employing highly skilled, well-paid professionals. From bomb-proof Cordura fabric to YKK zippers and recycled plastics, we source the highest quality U.S. materials to make the most comfortable, durable pack in disc golf. Our lifetime warranty stays with the pack, not the purchaser. So regardless of how you find us, we will be here to make sure your pack stays on the course and out of the landfill. Pound's integrity is held together with more than just thread.
Welcome back to the Upshot. Joining us now is Chris Clark of discgolf.law, lawyer to the disc golf world, and now a kind of go-to source for all things legal in this disc golf universe. And there's a whole lot more to talk about in the legal world lately, Chris. Welcome to the program.
Thanks a lot. It's an honor to be here. Great to see you guys.
Great to see you as well. And I know, we've had a chance to catch up a lot over the last few weeks as we kind of try to wrangle all of these legal topics. And back in the news is the law, as we have a new lawsuit that has been filed against Paul McBeth and Dylan Cease for their Florida course at Throwdown the Mountain, where a local player and actually a business owner, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce this name correctly, and I might not get it exactly right, so apologies if it's a little bit off, but Trevor Tonjes has sued McCease, the name of their corporation, for being hit in the head by a disc, it sounds like. So, Chris, what do you know about this case right now? And, obviously a lot of people have been pretty outraged by this because, getting hit by a Frisbee at a disc golf tournament is not something that seems out of the ordinary.
Yeah, that's well said. I talked to some various folks that had some firsthand information to share with me, some of the tournament staff and some of the folks that were there. It appears, and I'm going to try to get the whole numbers right. I believe Trevor, the gentleman you just mentioned, was standing on or near the tee of hole 12 and was hit by a drive that was thrown from the tee of hole 11. And if any of you are familiar with this course from watching the pros, watching coverage, watching the pros play there, it's not the same hole 11 and 12. So if you're trying to picture it in your mind from coverage, it's a different layout because this was an amateur event that was going on, amateur weekend. I think it was the third weekend of this Throwdown the Mountain event. But anyway, so apparently Trevor was struck and was injured, and there's some discrepancy among the people I talked to as to when exactly he exited the course. Interestingly, he was having a pretty good tournament. This was day 3 of this tournament. It was Sunday. He'd done pretty well on Friday, and then he shot the hot round for his division, which is MA50, on Saturday. But anyway, late in the Sunday round, he was injured. At some point shortly thereafter, he apparently left the course. And as far as I was able to tell from the people that I talked to, didn't really say much, if anything, to the tournament staff on the course at the time. And then a few days later, filed his lawsuit.
One thing that I've seen some question about, and I don't know if you have the answer. At this point for the tournament, did Paul McBeth and Dylan Cease own this property, or was it still owned by the previous owners?
So I can confirm for sure that McCease LLC, the LLC owned by McBeth and Cease, was the owner at the time that this occurred.
So I'm under the impression that when you sign up for the PDGA and you go to play in a tournament, you sign a waiver that basically says you could be killed playing disc golf. Right now, these kinds of waivers are commonplace, and they don't always hold up in court, to my understanding. Like, you can't just have somebody sign a waiver and then, push them off a cliff and be like, well, they signed a waiver. So what's the deal with that as far as you can tell in terms of the legal standing here? Because if you say, I'm taking risk to play in this disc golf tournament, and you get hit by a disc, which, you could maybe make an argument to a judge that the hold layouts were inappropriate or something like that. But is there enough standing there, given that, getting hit by a drive, while painful, is not typically debilitating? Now, I don't know the extent of the injuries here, but he's not in the hospital right now.
Right. So I'll respond to that in a few different ways. I think those of us that play disc golf, especially if you've played in tournaments or in competitive events, you do understand that you're assuming the risk of possibly getting hit by a disc. That doesn't necessarily mean it's your own fault for getting hit, but there is an element of assumption of the risk just by going onto a course. Forget signing a waiver. I think you could probably ask people that aren't that familiar with disc golf, and certainly those of us that are, we would all say, yeah, we understand that when you step onto a course, there is always the possibility that you could get hit. We know course designers take this into consideration and try to avoid that as much as they can. We don't want overlapping fairways or tee pads in the middle of an area where lots of discs fly by. But nevertheless, we know we're accepting some risk by doing that. There was a waiver at this event. The waiver was signed by all players. And I have not seen the waiver itself, but if it reads anything like most waivers I've seen in my career, I'm fairly confident it covered this type of event happening to someone. Now, in terms of the enforceability, yeah, if there was some type of dangerous condition that existed on this course, and the tournament staff was aware of it, or should have been aware of it, and chose to do nothing about it, then, yeah, somebody getting hit by a disc or injured in some way that you could somehow proximately link to the tournament staff's failure to correct this dangerous situation, then yes, I think under the law, the player might have a claim. I'm not aware that that was the case here. And so it does seem like a bit of an uphill battle for someone who, number one, assumed the risk like we all do of playing in a tournament. Number two, signed a waiver. And number three, at least to my knowledge, hasn't articulated any particular danger on the course that the tournament staff should have corrected.
One other aspect that comes into playing in PDGA tournaments is that you either are a registered member of the PDGA or pay a fee to cover your essentially insurance costs as being a member, right? There are certain things that go into the PDGA that if you're not a member, you have to pay that additional, I think it's $10 to play in a sanctioned event. Does the provision of insurance for the case or incident like this help cover tournament staff as well? Because, for example, if there was physical injury or bodily injury that required medical attention, there should have been a process of recourse through the PDGA thanks to that insurance. I don't know if that was pursued, but does just having that insurance provide an additional level of coverage for tournament directors?
Yes, it does. And I did look at that yesterday. And so this would, I think, Well, let me back up and answer a different way. I did record a YouTube video about this for our law firm's YouTube channel. We haven't released it yet, but it should be coming soon. And in it, I did talk about this insurance issue. And one thing that I wondered is, why don't we hear about this more often? I mean, think about the number of sanctioned PDGA events that happen every weekend. Surely there are people getting hit by discs and probably, unfortunately, sometimes, sustaining injuries from that. And one of the answers that I came up with was, I would expect in most cases like this, they would seek to file a claim through the PDGA's insurance policy it's in place for situations exactly like this. And so why this wasn't handled that way, I'm not sure. I mean, we can all probably come up with different guesses or make assumptions about certain things, but perhaps the injury didn't seem serious at the time and then it became more serious or something like that. I don't know. But it does seem like in most situations that I'm aware of like this, the recourse has been through the tournament staff and the PDGA's insurance rather than going and actually filing a lawsuit.
Let me speculate on perhaps why this is happening in this way, if I may, Chris. It's nice to be able to sue the world's richest disc golfer and a multimillionaire baseball player because you think, well, maybe I'll get a fat settlement because they just want it to go away. I mean, again, there's a reason we have courts. There's a reason we have a judicial system where people get to go in and they get to make their claims and the other side makes their claims and a judge or a jury adjudicates the process. And I certainly want everybody involved in this to be able to go through that whole sequence of events. I would not be surprised if McBeth and McCease and, the lawyers for their LLC say exactly what you just said, which is this is not the appropriate venue. They are the owners of this property, but this is an issue for the PDGA and this event that was happening there, and you need to take it up with this insurance company, and this should be just completely thrown out. I mean, basically, that's how it feels to me. Like, you're suing rich people because they're rich, and you have this opportunity. It's like when somebody slips in a store, and they're like, well, let me just try to get that money. That's what it feels like at first glance. That's what a lot of people seem to be thinking about the situation in general, because, again, I don't know the extent of the injuries. And I will say, I asked Trevor to come on the show or to make a comment, and I was told that he will not be making a comment at this time and will not speak on the matter. Totally fine. Just want to point out that we did ask him to come on. So, Chris, I'm not going to ask you as a lawyer to maybe speculate on that, but it does have us that it rings that way.
Yeah, I think it's not going to come as a surprise to any of your listeners that from time to time, lawsuits are filed without the purest of intentions. Pure intentions just being simply to be made whole for your injuries that were caused by someone else. But I can't disagree with anything you said. I mean, I'm certainly not in the business of talking people out of hiring lawyers, but I can say for myself and most of the people I know, filing a lawsuit a few days after this type of an event happened without first trying to address it through the tournament director or the PDGA would not have been how I or most people I know would have chosen to handle it.
Charlie, unless you have another question on this subject, I'd like to switch gears a little bit.
Really quick, I guess the last thing is, what is there a timeline? I know summons has been served. What's the timeline on when we might hear more on this case?
Yeah, it's a great question. I did not notice in the record at the court when exactly the defendants were served. It may be in there. I just don't recall it off the top of my head. And as most of us know, that triggers a clock running where, depending on the jurisdiction, you may have 21 days, you may have 30 days, something like that to respond. Those deadlines are frequently extended. And so, whether the defendant, in this case, McCease LLC, ends up even filing an answer, or whether if they just try to go straight to have this dismissed on the grounds that, he waived his rights through the waiver, or that he's failed to state a claim upon which relief can be granted, or something like that. I just don't know. So I would be surprised if 60 days from now, if we're sitting here and nothing has happened. I expect probably some type of either settlement or dismissal would probably happen in that time frame.
Okay, well, definitely something we'll keep an eye on. I wanted to shift gears then to an update in legal proceedings with Natalie Ryan, who has, to my understanding, filed now against the PDGA again and Kale LaVisca and the Preserve tournament. Chris, do you want to speak a little bit to this new filing? And primarily, I know this is something that you've kind of taken some notes on. How is this different than the OTB 1010 Rated Productions and California suits that we saw earlier a couple months ago?
Well, since you mentioned both 1010 Productions and LaVisca Disc Golf Design, I'll start there. 1010 Productions was named as a defendant in the California lawsuit. That is the organization that puts on the OTB Open. But other than just being named as a defendant, and in some of the pleadings just sort of lumped in as, quote, all defendants, they weren't mentioned specifically by name in Natalie's complaint in California. It's a little different here with LaVisca Disc Golf Design. They've actually added a claim to Natalie's lawsuit against specifically LaVisca Disc Golf Design for aiding and abetting the discrimination that was allegedly imposed by the PDGA and the Disc Golf Pro Tour. And so I think one difference is that LaVisca may find themselves in a situation of needing to be a little bit more involved than 1010 Productions did in California. So that's certainly one big difference. I would say the biggest difference here, and this would be, I think, in Natalie's favor, is we do have some precedent here in Minnesota, thanks to the J.C. Cooper versus USA Powerlifting case. Now, for those of you that may not be familiar with that, J.C. Cooper was a trans woman powerlifter. The USA Powerlifting had a policy in place that prevented any athlete that was identified female at birth from competing in the female division at sanctioned events. Long story short, J.C. Cooper sued over that policy, and for the most part, the court ruled in her favor. So when we talk about precedent, there's some nuance to it. Binding precedent usually comes from a higher court, like a court of appeals or a superior court, or Supreme Court, I should say. Decisions of other trial courts are persuasive precedent, but they're not as strongly required to be followed. So it doesn't mean that, to the extent we can align the facts of Natalie's case up with this USA Powerlifting case, that means it's a slam dunk for Natalie. And the job of the attorneys for the defendants, one part of their job will be to find ways to distinguish the facts in this case from the facts in the USA Powerlifting case. So I think that's a huge difference here. Certainly do not expect any of the jurisdictional craziness that we had in California when, Natalie's essentially prevailed at the trial court level on her request for a temporary restraining order. And then that was reversed the next day on jurisdictional grounds. I don't think we'll see any type of maneuver like that. I'm not aware that the PDGA or the Pro Tour or any defendant would have grounds on which to distinguish or to claim that the court doesn't have jurisdiction over them. although they may try. So yeah, I mean, those are a few of the things that I'm seeing differently. And I guess the last one I would mention, since this is something that I learned from listening to the Upshot, was that Natalie's lawyer in California was essentially working for free. He was not charging legal fees to Natalie to represent her in that matter. She's got a new legal team now in Minnesota, and I have no idea what the financial arrangement is between her and that law firm. And I would suspect, most people, when they hire legal counsel, they have to pay for it. And so unless she's found another law firm that was willing to volunteer to represent her, I think the budget considerations will be maybe a pressure point in this case that she didn't have to face in California.
I think, if we can just zoom out slightly on the Ryan situation, we still have pending litigation in California, although, the court, the refilings with the state court and whatnot, still has to happen. This Minnesota filing was anticipated not only because we were literally told it, but it made a lot of sense given the J.C. Cooper case that you described. Where would you say things stand overall in Natalie Ryan's efforts here? Although she sort of won and then lost in terms of the restraining order in California, and I know there was a hearing yesterday in the Minnesota case. We don't have any order or resolution yet there, but we should probably hear something in the next 24 hours. Does it feel like there's like one side is in control here, or is it still very much open?
That's a great question. I will say from my perspective, I feel like Natalie's side has exceeded my expectations. I thought that California was probably an ideal venue for her to file her lawsuit. And even then, I thought that she had an uphill battle in succeeding to get everything she asked for. And I still think she has an uphill battle, but she's climbed a good way up the hill, and apparently doesn't have any intention, or certainly isn't giving any signs of letting up in her fight for what she believes is right. And so I can assure you from conversations that I've had with people, specifically at the Disc Golf Pro Tour, they were not very pleased to see a second lawsuit filed that they're going to now have to, pay lawyers to defend. And any of us that have been through this know lawsuits are expensive. They're distracting. It's a big headache. A lot of times you reach the end and it doesn't really feel like anybody has won. And because this is an issue that, I've talked to a lot of people a lot smarter and more thoughtful than me about this issue, and still haven't heard anyone come up with what I think is really a compromise that could be palatable for both sides. And so for all those reasons, I think as long as Natalie either has lawyers that'll work for her for free or people that are willing to fund her legal battles, I would probably big picture overall give a slight edge to Natalie right now.
So let's say Natalie loses either in California or Minnesota. Is this kind of the end of, you say here, and the reason I asked this question is you said, as long as she has the money to continue to fight these legal battles, let's say she loses these current filings, both of them in both states. Is there another route of recourse that she can go, i.e. filing in another state against different entities again? If so, how does losing some suits and winning other suits matter? Or is this kind of the final battleground where once this is decided and adjudicated, if it rules in favor of the PDGA, then that's it. It's said and done, and there really isn't a lot of other options except in appeals to this ruling. But once this suit plays and runs its course, that's it. We've probably seen the end of the matter.
So we could all think of various different types of legal topics that are treated differently from one state to another. There's tons of examples of that. And so I would say in the short and maybe even medium term, one possibility is, Natalie continues to maintain her legal fight and wins some and loses some, and we've got different interpretations in different states of how enforceable the PDGA's and the Disc Golf Pro Tour's policies are relative to trans athletes. One way that cases end up before the United States Supreme Court is if you have conflicting rulings in different circuits. And we're a long way from that now. It's something that would take years and years to happen. But to answer the question you asked about what maybe could sort of be the ultimate resolution here, the Ninth Circuit may rule one way and the Fourth Circuit might rule another way, and the Supreme Court decides to take that up to clear up any confusion among the federal circuits. So that's one possibility. But I, as I did before, I have to, if for no other reason, give Natalie credit for her perseverance, for the her willingness to fight this battle, whether you agree with her or not, whether you agree with her position or not. But I wanted to mention that because frequently the way these things end up is people just decide, like, fighting this battle is exhausting and I'm beaten up and I'm defeated and I just don't feel like fighting this anymore. And then whether someone else would come along and sort of take up this issue, I don't know. But so I would say I think a couple of likely outcomes, or maybe a few likely outcomes. One is some lawsuits get filed and one way or other decided in various states, and they may even get decided differently, which means different rules apply in different states. Another possibility is this ends up in federal court in different circuits, and we got conflicting rulings, and then the Supreme Court ends up hearing it. Or what I think is most likely, and I'm as bad of a future predictor as I am a sports bettor, but I would put my money on eventually Natalie will say she's had enough. And whether that's, a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, who knows? But this kind of battle just really takes it out of you.
I mean, I think what's interesting here is that there's also the wider world of transgender athletes, typically male to female, who are suing in various places for the opportunity to compete in the women's or girls divisions of various sports. And simultaneously, you have state legislatures passing laws that are banning this from happening. Back in April, the Supreme Court upheld a temporary injunction from a circuit court that essentially the appeals court said a middle school transgender girl would have to be allowed to compete in the girls division. And the Supreme Court basically said, we're not going to change the appeals court ruling. It was a brief thing that it wasn't really like a big precedent setting decision, but this is all happening in real time. And that's why, like, since the beginning of this Natalie Ryan case, I assumed that this was going to be something that would be playing into the larger conversation about what exactly are the laws of the states and of the United States from the federal level on what exactly we do with transgender participation in women's divisions. I don't think there's an answer to that yet. So in my mind, even if Natalie Ryan doesn't continue to sue the PDGA and the Pro Tour, this could still come back in the future if states or the federal government make big Supreme Court rulings on exactly how this is supposed to be dealt with or how they feel it should be dealt with. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. And, my wife used to be a member of the General Assembly here in North Carolina. So we follow our state legislature fairly closely. And here in North Carolina, I believe it was just last week, passed legislation relative to transgender athletes. So it certainly is something that's out there and that's happening. And it absolutely might be the case that it's a different athlete or a different sport that ends up making it to a place in our legal system where it can sort of set a blanket precedent for everyone. But, as I've said, I've talked about we just talked about the McCease lawsuit, we talked about the Gannon lawsuit back when that was going on. It's easy for me to see a resolution to those types of lawsuits, what type of resolution that would be. It's just like I said, alluded to earlier, it's hard to envision what the solution to this will be that would, satisfy both sides. I can't think that there is one. And so regardless of how it ends up, where it ends up, and on whose behalf, somebody's likely to be upset.
Very, very interesting stuff. We should know more about this Ryan case in the next couple days, yes?
Yes, we should.
And then I guess, you mentioned the Gannon Buhr lawsuit with Prodigy. That is now essentially settled. We don't know the terms of the settlement, but I think, like you said, it's easy to imagine exactly how that played out. They came to an agreement about the money.
Right.
So is there anything else to know about that case at this point, or is that just kind of like a typical lawsuit gets filed, gets settled type of situation?
Just sort of a hot take on that situation is what are the odds that he ends up re-upping with Prodigy? I'm really curious about that because I think most people give that almost zero chance of happening. But for me, I'm not so sure. And that's not based on any inside information, just a outsider that knows that business is business. And, hey, if Prodigy puts the best deal on the table, we'll have to see what happens.
Hey, The Rock's coming back to the Fast and the Furious franchise, so right. Anything is possible.
That's right.
All right, Chris. Well, we really appreciate your insight, and gosh, who knows? We might have to have you back on Thursday if we have updates in the Ryan case. So, thank you.
I'd love to do it. One last thing I'd like to shout out, if you'll allow me, before I sign off.
Sure.
When I'm not lawyering, I am the executive director of the Ulibarri Leadership Foundation, which is a great charity that awards high school scholarships to disc golfers to go to college. So I would urge everyone to go over to uli.foundation and check us out, learn more.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Upshot. Great to get some insight from Chris. Josh, we didn't necessarily get too much into the specifics of the Trevor Tonjes lawsuit against McCease, but it is worth noting he's suing for in excess of $50,000 for the injuries sustained. It just, Josh, it just doesn't, this is not going to win, right? No. I mean, maybe they're going to get a settlement. Maybe he's going to get some money, but like if you get hurt and you think that somebody's at fault, and you want to have your medical bills covered, that's fair. But getting hit by a Frisbee is not getting rear-ended at 50 miles per hour, and it's not something that's going to require $50,000 of remedy. And so it just feels like cash grab, right?
Well, and he's been out playing tournaments like shortly after this debilitating injury.
Come on, man.
Yeah. Here's the one thing I'll say. When you go online to the socials and you look up like the Gannon lawsuit, you even see, a third of people are like, yeah, no, Prodigy's all well within their rights to sue Gannon. Natalie Ryan, a very split issue. This seems very one-sided on people's feelings towards the McCease case, and it is not in Trevor's favor, from what I've seen. So I think the biggest concern is that I know that one tournament has already been moved for the 4th of July from the Throwdown the Mountain property.
Yeah, it's fully closed. The course is closed right now.
Yeah, and so people are concerned about the the impact this is going to have on tournaments that are held at this property.
Look, it's going to get resolved one way or another. And then the course will probably reopen. I think hopefully things move a little quicker rather than slower, but these stuff takes time. It's just how it is. So anyway, let us know your thoughts. Hit us up, upshot@ultiworld.com. All right, it's time for 30-second rule, where we get 30 seconds to talk about a bunch of topics, and if we go over, it doesn't really matter. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, so first up, we have Simon Lizotte is not going to be making the trip over to Europe. He made the announcement saying he did this in consultation with his team over at MVP. And that he will not be playing, unfortunately, this year. I know this is something that a lot of people are bummed about. Seeing Simon over in Europe is always an exciting thing, but probably I didn't see if he'd said if it was about his family or not, but you can kind of assume that it's an opportunity to spend some more time with his family, get to stay home with them.
A representative for MVP Eric over on Reddit posted specifically that, said basically that Simon, it's a lot of time away from home. He's got a kid, he's got a wife. It's already lots of time. But then to go to Europe, that's like 2-3 weeks of time away. And, I think, look, it is admittedly surprising to see a German national not competing at the European Open, a tournament where, he is beloved. Now, we must also acknowledge that his former sponsor, Discmania, is not only the title sponsor of the European Open, but essentially the operator. I mean, this is UC's tournament. Is there some bad blood there? Are some issues there? Is it possible that the Discmania, MVP thing is part of the decision here? Obviously. You cannot rule that out. Now, it's easy. It's when people leave a company, they say they're retiring. I want to spend more time with my family, right? That could mean they got fired or forced out, but they say I want to spend more time with my family. Now, I'm not saying that's what happens here. I do legitimately think Simon probably does want to just spend more time with his family, but you can't rule out the possibility that this had something to do with it. That the Discmania connection had something to do with it. And but again, I mean, it's just surprising it's one thing if Ricky Wysocki doesn't go to Europe, but for Simon not to go to Europe, that's a lot more surprising.
Simon's gonna be seen out at like Vegas or something with his time off. They're gonna be like, time with family. He's like, yeah. I mean, I got a weekend.
I brought my family with me. They're not here right now, but they're in the hotel.
They're in the hotel. Promise. That's funny. Next up on 30-second rule, this week, Junior Worlds is happening in the best disc golf city in the world, Peoria, Illinois. And the distance competition, I really should just let this die. I bring this on myself. The long drive competition happened this past week on Sunday. And, well, folks, it made me feel real bad about my disc golf game. In mixed junior 18 and under, Connor McLeod threw 670 to win that division. In FJ 18, so girls junior under 18, Elezra?
I think it's probably Eliezra.
Eliezra? Middling? Middling? I'm so sorry. This there are a lot of consonants together in that name. She threw 482.
Wow.
That's so far.
Wow. Wait, give us some of the under 15s too.
Yeah, here we go. MJ under 15, Alex Knaston threw 674 or for 647, 647 in girls junior 15. Addison Woodard 351.
God, dude.
In mixed junior 12 and under, Colin Fife threw 401 feet.
That is insane.
Girls junior 12 and under, MJ Gager threw 329.
Wow.
MJ 10 is Cole Kreschik, and he threw 327.
Oh my God, it's a little 9-year-old out there throwing further than half the show's audience.
FJ 10, girls junior 10 through 205. Genevieve Davis, MJ 08 through Rylan Hag through 204, and girls junior 8 and under. Hannah Midling. So seems like a sister probably.
They bomb.
Yeah. 221. She outdrove the boy on the MJ under 8 at 221. I mean, that's crazy.
If you're looking for evidence as to why when we're 10, 15 years down the road, people aren't going to be talking about Paul McBeth anymore. This is why. These kids right now are playing from a young age. They're learning technique from a young age, and they are simply going to be bomb. I mean, I watched the video. There's a video clip from the PDGA. I don't know if there's like a whole series of video, but I saw a clip on the PDGA Facebook page of Elieze's throw. Gorgeous. Just like beautiful form. Jams it on hyzer, flips it up, gets some turn. What was it? 427 she threw?
482.
482. 482. And like the people are going to cope with, they were throwing downwind and blah, blah, blah. But come on. I mean, yeah. Can you throw 482 downwind?
No.
I can't throw 482 downwind.
I can't throw 482.
That's unbelievable.
I've never had a disc crack that number. I don't care the circumstances.
Congrats to all these power throwers at this young age. It's amazing to think about the talent that's coming up right now.
Eliezer, in her division in the FJ18, second place was 308.
Yeah, I mean, she clearly is like special.
But 482, that's like FPO distance on the Pro Tour.
Oh, yeah.
Like that, she's got the distance to keep up and hang on the tour.
No doubt.
Man,
she's currently 885 rated. She's been doing a lot of winning in FA1, and I don't think she's taken cash yet, but keep an eye out for her because she's from Georgia. I think we're going to see her very soon. Do we have results in yet from the tournament? I think the first round's maybe today. Yeah, I think today is the first round. So we'll check back in next week.
The other thing, you mentioned that she hadn't taken cash yet. If I remember right, we were talking about this. I think you have to retain amateur status for junior worlds as well.
That's right.
Which I think is kind of weird, but
she's already signed up to play NADGT.
Okay.
So she's in FA1. So, we'll see.
Yeah.
She's currently the highest rated player signed up in FA1 at 885.
I bet she throws the furthest too.
Boy. Wow. So wild stuff. Okay. Really quick. We already did some purse watch, hole 18 reviews and picks overview from this past week. Josh really had a great weekend on the picks. Gets both Gannon and Kristen for a solid 10 points, picking both winners. Also had Isaac Robinson on his MPO podium for a total of 11. I had Kristen, and I got Macy Vela Diaz on there. Feel pretty good about that one.
Yeah, that was good.
I get 6, but I went over on my admittedly interesting but very wrong set of MPO podium picks for Matteo, Simon, and Emerson. Simon was looking pretty good, but
Simon was looking good.
Just kind of made a couple weird mistakes down the stretch. So that's the picks. Hole 18, not my favorite, Josh. What'd you think?
I actually don't mind the MPO hole. I think it's decent. It's got enough intrigue that if you need the birdie and you're pushing, you can create mistakes, especially in the wind. Isaac Robinson, for example, I mean, that could have been really interesting at the end. And I don't want to punish the hole for losing out on drama just because the drama happened on the chase card and then eliminated any drama for Gannon Buhr. I give it a 7. It's good. I think it is. The scoring spread is good, both in the wind and in not in the wind. There isn't the eagle opportunity, but I think there is enough intrigue for me that keeps it interesting. And I think it's actually a pretty good looking hole, all things considered. Like, it looks nice and is kind of appealing. So I give it a 7. I think it's pretty decent in my opinion.
It's par 5. It's really long. Yes, you can mess up, but you can't really eagle it. I don't know. It's a 5 for me, Josh.
Okay.
It's fine. I mean, it's fine. It's fine, but like, it's nothing special about it as a hole 18. We got a spectator review from Nick.
Yeah.
We'll read more of his email another day. He gives it a 4 out of 10, and his first line is, "You can't see anything until the upshots." From there, hole 18 is great, especially with the OB so close to the green, so you can really get right up to it. But he says it's impossible to know whether they're putting for birdie or double bogey because you can't see the first 800 feet of the hole because of the hill. That's reasonable. That's a reasonable complaint. Yeah. And I don't really like a par 5 as the final hole. I'm not saying it's impossible, but like, a par 5 in disc golf means it's got to be 1,000+ feet long. And is that like, okay, giant drive, another giant drive, upshot birdie. It's fine. There was scoring separation. It's a fine hole, but for me as a hole 18, it's just a 5. On the FPO side, they couldn't birdie it, so there were 0 birdies in rounds 2 and 3. I mean, I know it was windy, but there were only 3 birdies in round 1. Too hard. Same problems as MPO. I give it a 4.
I give it a 3.
A 3. Wow.
Yeah, and I'm real upset about this, and here's why.
Oh my.
They played this same hole last year, and it wasn't any better last year. And if you look at the course map, there is another tee pad about 150 feet up from where they played the FPO one. They don't even have to put in a new tee pad. Like, there is another location available for them to play, and you knew it was too hard last year. Like, it feels like a fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind of thing. Again. I can't get fooled again. I'm giving it a 3. I want something different for FPO next year.
It's funny because the course made a bunch of positive FPO changes, and like this hole just didn't really get fixed. I don't know. Maybe they thought it was going to play easier than it did because players are throwing further. I don't know. Can't win them all, but this hole 18 isn't for me.
Yeah, that's so the 6 average on MPO doesn't put it in the last, but definitely kind of in the bottom quartile. Over on the FPO side, this ties it with Music City Open for the worst.
Similarly, I mean, they're not the same hole. MCO is like up this big uphill thing, but the similar problem, which is it's like too hard and like kind of just long, lots of sort of big shot,
throw big.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So that is going to do it for this edition of the Upshot. By the way, Valerie Mondahano, top 10, Josh.
Almost podium. I almost got the point for the podium.
Wow.
Just one stroke away.
More to come on Thursday. We'll get you ready for the Preserve. We might have an update for you on the Natalie Ryan case as well. And a couple other fun topics we're going to get to. So we will talk to you then right here on the Upshot.